Welcome everyone. We've still got people coming in. This is turning out to be one of the most popular learning lunches. We have 115 people who've registered, so we're thrilled with that. We would encourage you to join our shared world. It's completely free. It is the biggest collection of people who work across education for sustainability and climate change, whether it's social, economic, environmental, culture, peace. I could go on with those thousands of different adjectival education. So it's a welcome everyone coalition of the willing, although that now sounds like it's to do with the war in Ukraine, but it's not. It's about we're hoping that we're all going to get enough power behind our elbows to make an impact on SDG 4.7. So if you don't know that, do go onto the Our Shared World website. And if you want to peruse any of these learning lunches, and in particular this one, the both the talk and the slides will be available. So a massive big welcome from myself, Kathy, and Holly. I don't think Elena's with us. So Kathy, Holly, Elena, and myself are the co-chairs of Our Shared World, which is a different way of running something, and it works really well as we share the load. But we are absolutely thrilled to have Stephen Sterling join us today. For those of you who don't know, he doesn't want me to say too much because he thinks it's going to be embarrassing. I don't agree, but we'll get to that point. So Stephen, over a cup of coffee in my garden, did say that he thinks he's been doing this since the 1980s, and he may have been the first person to say the words education for sustainability. So, no, we're all clap. Stan, how are you, Stan? I can see Stan Terry. This is fantastic. People have emerged from the woodwork all over. It's really great. Which means that he's been in this game longer than probably all of us, including myself. And not only has Stephen been thinking about this and writing a PhD, he's also been trying to practice this. He was a teacher at one point in Canada, in the north, and he's also been heavily involved in almost all policy potentially exciting events that could have been there. So I don't know all of them, but I know he's written various papers for UNESCO or booklets or pamphlets. There was a thing called the what was it called? Sustainable Education Panel, which
Yes,
is
I was. Yes.
yeah. Anyway, some people call it the yeah, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, so he did some of that and lots and lots of other things. And in particular, of course, for many of us, this would have been the first book that we ever read, which was starting to talk about education sustainability. And it was the one that I read, and it transformed my life. No pressure then, Steve. And his latest one is now this one called Learning and Sustainability in Dangerous Times. And Kathy is going to put that into the chat if she hasn't done already. So that you can also buy it and make him vast amounts of money, which I don't think actually works that way, does it, Stephen? Stephen is going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then he's got a question for us where we go into breakout groups that George is going to organize. And you'll have about 10 minutes in your groups. And then the idea is that you come back, and because we've got so many of you, we're going to ask you to write your one or two key points from your discussion in the chat when we all come back together, because that's the way it gets recorded. And then anyone who wants to say something to Stephen or ask a question or whatever, or we'll have that until it says 1:45, but we tend to run over till about 2. And I will make my apologies now for having to leave at 1:40, but I think it's going to be fabulous. So, Stephen, over to you.
Right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for turning up in your lunch hour. Thanks very much, Anne, for the introduction. So, yes, in fact, if I count my teaching career and joining the Council for Environmental Education in 1978, I've been involved in this field for over 50 years, which makes me feel incredibly old. Um, and I think one of the few benefits of being around for decades is you get a long view of history in the making, both in society and in education. I think right now, I think like a lot of people, maybe many of you, I think we're in a period of difficult transition if you look at world affairs. And I think the tension is between two stories, if you like. And one is the old story and way of seeing the world, which is breaking down but resistant to change, and a new story, which is trying to assert a more integrative and relational perspective. And I think our field, environmental sustainability education, is in the middle of this tension in a way. It's kind of riding two horses at the same time, which accounts for many of the issues in the field. So, the title of the talk, Education and the Good of the Whole, I hope that aligns with Cass's invite to me to issue a provocation. If it's not a provocation, then hopefully it's maybe just intriguing. Now, what does he mean by this stuff? So, given the time, there's an awful lot I could say, but I'm going to give you a kind of rapid outline of some of my key ideas, which I've been working on for a long time. And in particular, I've been thinking recently about this whole notion of wholeness. Yeah, so wholeness, both as a description in the sense of recognizing the whole person or the whole community or the whole planet indeed, but also wholeness as a normative principle. That is our concern for wholeness as a desirable and healthy state. So I think this notion is implicit in our work, but rarely recognized and rarely discussed. But I think it's key to understanding what Joanna Macy, who sadly you may know she's just died, called the great unraveling in our increasingly turbulent and dysfunctional world, the unraveling of healthy systems, if you like. And I think it's also key to reimagining and recharging education for the task ahead, which Joanna Macy called the Great Turning, and other people call the Great Leap. That's a term from the Club of Rome, or the Great Transition. So this title, "The Good of the Whole," that phrase I got from Donella Meadows when I was researching the book, and she's one of my inspirational sources and has been for years. You may know Donella Meadows. She died maybe 25 years ago. She was one of the authors of the Limits to Growth study in 1972, and she was a systems thinker and an educator and a visionary. So this idea of going for the good of the whole, I think, is intriguing. So I'm going to talk around this idea. So the next slide is possibly the most plain slide you've ever seen. The word whole, the word good, and the word purpose. So have a quick think about how do those words strike you? What do they mean to you? Or the greater good even, and how do these words perhaps relate to each other? Okay. So going on, here we are. This is the current situation. And as you know, humanity has given itself the name Homo sapiens, which means wise man, wise humans. And I think probably we're busily earning the title Homo stupidus, given the events. So which kind of future are we going to go with, the left or the right? So things are not looking great, as you know. This slide comes from the World Economic Forum. I'm not sure they're the ones that came up with the term polycrisis, but it describes the interrelationship between issues which are deeply interrelated and interpenetrating. So that idea of polycrisis echoes the Club of Rome's idea of the world problematique, which it came out with in about 1970. So this crisis is now precipitating deep questions about long-held patterns and assumptions in human activity, including in economics and food and energy and health and design and all the rest of it, but also on the role of education. We'll come to that in a minute. So I think this situation we're in, this polycrisis, is not an unfortunate accident. Myself and others argue that it arises fundamentally from a maladaptive and fragmentary worldview. So if we take Fritjof Capra, he's another of my influences. He says these are systemic problems, which means they're all interconnected and independent. Ultimately, these problems must be seen as just different facets of one single crisis, a crisis of perception. Most people in our modern society subscribe to the concepts of an outdated worldview, a perception of reality inadequate for dealing with an overpopulated, globally connected world. So that's a very striking quote from Capra. But he's not the only one. Going back to Donella Meadows, there she is. And she said, this is 1982, a long time ago, and maybe you can read that for yourselves. We treat it as if it was not interconnected, as if it were divisible, separable, simple, and infinite. Our persistent, intractable global problems arise directly from this mismatch. So this is a fundamental criticism or critique of the way, in the Western worldview at least, the way we see things. And then if we look at education, another influence in my thinking has been Fritz Schumacher. And again, look at those dates, written in 74, published in 97. The volume of education has increased and continues to increase, yet so do pollution, exhaustion of resources, and the dangers of ecological catastrophe. And then he goes on to say, if still more education is to save us, it would have to be education of a different kind, an education that takes us to the depths of things. So what does that mean? And is that still a current argument even all these years later? So the question I've been asking of myself and everybody I came into contact with, let's say, over years, has been this: how should and how can education and learning be rethought and reconfigured to make a significant and central contribution to achieving a more sustainable and just world? That seems to make sense. That seems to stand. That makes that's a challenge in itself, and it seems to be enough. But over time, and I've been thinking that isn't enough in itself. So I've reconfigured the question. Same issue from a deeper level. What's the nature of the change of consciousness that appears necessary to achieving a safe, more ecologically sustainable and livable society, which can both survive and thrive, and what changes may be required in education if we're going to contribute to that kind of consciousness? So that's a pretty big question, and one I'm tussling with all the time, in a way. Now, UNESCO, as you probably know, and mentioned, I've worked with UNESCO, and to their credit, they've been talking about the transformation of education for a long time and set up the Features of Education initiative, which you can check out. And it's important, but have a look at that quote, which came from the conference last December. We face an existential choice between continuing on an unsustainable path or radically changing. Education is crucial to this change of course, yet education itself must be transformed. So we're in this kind of double bind that people are pointing to education as an agent of change, and yet saying it has to change in order to be an agent of change. You know, this is a fundamental issue, really, which I've been tussling with. And though I think UNESCO's work is creditable, I don't think they go deeply enough in terms of the critique of what's wrong with the current mainstream, and secondly, deep enough in terms of spelling out an holistic alternative. So I've been arguing for years that we need to shift from a reductionist, mechanistic, neoliberal view of education towards a holistic, ecological and relational view, sometimes called a living systems view. And to boil it right down, I've used this very simple metaphor. So to illustrate the essential characteristic of the dominant cultural Western worldview that we think in boxes, we organize in boxes. Everything's mentally and actually in boxes, if you like. And one of these exercises I do with students is what are the property of box? And then I go on to what's the property of a web? And it's another metaphor to illustrate the necessary alternative. So the basic tension is between the dominant view, which is quantitative, reductionist, objectivist, dualist, anthropocentric, fragmentary in effect, and the ecological, which is qualitative, systemic, participatory, ecocentric, and integrative in effect. So there's fundamentally two ways of seeing and doing here, in tension with each other. And Fritjof Capra says that the basic tension is between the whole and the parts. And this competition between these two worldviews goes back hundreds of years, literally. So in detail, they look like this, without me having time to explain these. And it's not a matter of abandoning the left-hand side of seeing and thinking. It's a matter of using those tools, if you like, when they're appropriate, but for putting far more emphasis, what Capra calls a shift of attention in the red letters at the bottom, on the relational right-hand side. And I'm sure you can begin to recognize how these two views play out in how we see and practice education, which I don't really have time to elaborate, but the next slide gives you some indication of that. So the mechanistic view is manifested in such things as single disciplines and belief in value-free knowing and emphasis on the individual learner, privileging cognitive over effective and practical knowledge, absence of the art, etc., etc., etc. And this has worsened over the past 20 years through pressures from the neoliberal agenda, which stresses the purpose of education to serve the economy primarily. So this misses out an awful lot about what it is to be human, including love and caring and inclusion and affinity and imagination and creativity and so on and so forth. And it's rather limited in helping learners cope with complexity and rapid change and systemic issues, in my view. Okay, so part of this next one, I like this cartoon where you've got a teacher talking about linearity, basically, and the little girl puts her head out the door and says, the world actually is not linear at all. And I love this quote from Bella Bannerfait, which I'll let you read because I'm short of time. But the interesting thing about this quote is he's saying this in 1991, and it's as relevant today as it was then, if not more so. Okay, so to look at a bit more depth at these two worldviews and characteristics, this is the way we this is the way we tend to do things and see things, with an emphasis on the part, which is best suited to simple contained issues and problems which are amenable to this approach, but unsuited to a world of complexity, living systems, both natural and human, ambiguity, and rapid change. So if we apply the wrong tools to the systemic world, it tends to have a disintegrative effect on the world, and we can see this happening. Now, if we look at the alternative, this is all summary stuff, if you like, I'm doing here, the essence of the ideas. It looks like this. And the shift, the shift of attention, which Capra talks about, is from the, I don't know if I can indicate here, from the left to the right. So from disconnection to interconnectedness, from linear to circular, i.e. circular economy, let's say, from silos to looking at the qualities of emergence, from parts to wholes, and so on. You can see there's two logic. These two worldviews are logically consistent within each other. Okay, they make a logical whole. And so what I'm trying to present here is, in a very simple form, is that we need to, well, as Capra says, pay attention to the more systemic, holistic, way of seeing and doing. So coming towards the end of this quick romp through the ideas. So, what is the good of the whole? Well, that was my take at it, if you like, and it's a lot of reading. Um, and really what Meadows is talking about is she's a systems thinker. So don't, in a complex system, don't just maximize or optimize one component and one relationship, one entity. Look at the resource, the implications and the consequences if you make that change. And think about the well-being of the system as a whole, whether it's a person or an institution or an economy or a farm or whatever it is. So these sort of systems ideas apply at different scales. So we should be working for well-being, health, resilience, and so on. And I also think it's a matter of recovering our shared humanity and valuing the other and nature. So it gives us a mandate, I think, for renewed purpose in education. And you can see these other implications towards the end of that slide too. And then I think I've got, yeah, just 1 or 2 slides left, which I'll go through quickly. So in terms of education and learning, so this has implications of learning for education, of course. So how do we design and facilitate learning experiences which are reflexive and experiential and explorative and participative and real world and so on and so forth? And how far is this pedagogy normal practice, or are we still struggling to assert it against still a sort of a narrow way of conceiving and practicing education? In practice and policy. Um, so just very quickly, this relates also to where are we going with our work? There's been a lot of emphasis on sustainability competencies, but competencies are a means. They're not an end in themselves. So the whole regenerative debate, I think, gives us guidelines of what we need to be working towards in this great transition. And this is just one person's idea of that. Wayne Visser, I don't know who he is, but I came across it and I thought it was a great slide to put in to work from the huge problems we get on the left towards an integrative way of developing healthy systems. So, the other thing to say is that the word whole and health and healthy all come from the same etymological root, interestingly enough. And then lastly, I came across this quote by Wendell Berry. You may have come across Wendell Berry, a great philosopher, poet, farmer in the States. And I just love this quote, which you can read. All we can do to prepare rightly for tomorrow is to do the right thing today. It is the presence of good work, good thoughts, good acts, good places, by which we know that the present does not have to be a nightmare of the future. And if you want to know more, it's a very rapid talk and tour of some of my ideas. So there's a lot more in the book and on my website, which needs updating, by the way, but there's still a lot of material in it. So I hope that's made some sense to you. It coheres, and in Kathy's terms, it's been sufficiently provocative. Thank you.
And do you have the last question, your question for us, Stephen?
Uh,
On a slide?
yeah, no, I don't have another slide.
Okay.
What was
I
it,
can bring
Kathy?
up and
Let me pop it in the chat for you, Stephen. Thank you so
Okay.
much. There we go.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Stephen. That was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
thank you.
A romp through, but really clearly laid out.
Thank you. Yeah. It's what if I remember, it's what might the idea of the good of the whole mean in your context? Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you
just
so
doing
much,
that.
Stephen.
Yeah.
And that is our provocation question for our breakout rooms. So just in terms of timing, just want to make sure that we are honoring your lunch break. As Anne said, we will probably run over the quarter two, but for now we'll make sure that for breakout rooms we get 6 minutes to to just share a little bit about this question and have a think. What does or might the good of the whole mean in your context? And then we'll come back together just for a couple of minutes to share our thoughts and ideas in the chat, and to say farewell. So thank you so much for that provocation, Stephen. So many interesting thoughts to get us sparking. And so I think George now is going to send us all into breakout rooms to have
I
a
see a question in
short
chat
discussion.
asking about whether the presentation will be available. Yes, it will, and the video of Stephen talking. So all of that will be available on our shared world. And Stephen, if you don't mind, we'd like to put it on the Seed website as well, as you've now
So,
become our first ever honorary president. So
so I have.
you have. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Anne.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We know that it's painfully short that time. You've literally just started to have conversations and you're whipped back into the main room. So apologies for that, but we hope you made a few connections and had a chance to think about Stephen's provocation there on the common good. If you can pop your ideas into the chat, any key ideas, that would be really lovely so that Stephen can see them, we can all see them. So perhaps take a moment or two just to write any of the key takeaways from your group into the chat. That would be great. And I think everybody's back now, are they?
Yeah, everyone's back.
Great. So yes, so the provocation was, what does or might the good of the whole mean in your context? If you had conversations and connected with other people and that was as far as you got, that's fine too. So I'll give you a moment or two to pop those in.
Some really good comments here. Thanks everybody for engaging so well in such a short space of time. Yes, some great stuff here. I mean, um, couple of comments. One is that, you know, again from Danella Meadows, she talks about, you know, although um, uh, systemic problems can interact and cause more systemic problems. You know, good things also interact. So, you know, so the systemic nature of things, if you do, in a sense, inverted commas, good things, they can then have reverberative effects. And so, you know, so if you take Tim Linton at the University of Exeter, he's now talking about um, social tipping points, for example, and co-benefits, and these kind of ideas. So this is a whole other way of going into making positive change, and there's a whole literature and thinking around that people might want to look at. Another quick comment um, was someone talked about the hearts and the heads and the hands, and of course, you know, that is the need to see whole learners as whole people and not just brains on legs, you know, which tends to be the testing culture that we have tends to emphasize. And for my work, that triad, the heart, the head, and the hands, is part of the model which I've been developing for some years, which I call a triangle model, which I elaborate in my book, which is quite simple. It's got three parts, but seeing, knowing, doing is the key part of it. Which I think it's quite a powerful model. It gives us a key for making the kind of changes we need, and helping us to understand the one-sidedness of the sort of mechanistic reductionist way of seeing things. And that's what's wrong with it. It's not in a sense wrong in itself. It's just so one-sided, it's inadequate for the kind we now live, the world we now live in, and our attempts to make it a healthy world in all senses.
Stephen, thank you. With great regret, we've come to the end of our session. We've kept people a little longer than we promised, so apologies for that. And we'd just like to say a huge, huge thank you to you for coming along and for the immense impact of your work. There have been so many. I hope you've caught some of the comments in the chat around the impact your work has had. And I'm trying to forgive myself for only giving you 15 to 20 minutes to talk about such a huge, broad scope of work. We hope that you've enjoyed joining us today. One of Stephen's key things is relational learning, relationships, getting to know each other. So I hope you got the chance to say hello to a new face or two in the chat. We're going to be taking a summer break for August, but we'll be back on the 9th of September with a session to be confirmed. So I can't quite tell you what that is yet, but we do have Dr. Paul Varr, who's here with us today, who's going to be joining us on the 7th of October. So we're really looking forward to that, and Peacemakers, the following section after that. So if you'd just like to virtually raise your hands to Stephen. Thank you so much for all of those ideas, provocations, and your passion and purpose over all these years. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.